My name is Simone, and I was 34 the afternoon my mother-in-law made our entire extended family vote on whether I should be permanently banned from the family. I sat perfectly still as 12 hands went up into the air. They all voted yes. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just looked at the lavish dining room around us, a room paid for by the very restaurant empire I secretly owned. Before I tell you how I legally evicted them from their own lives just 7 days later, let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and subscribe if you have ever had to remind toxic in-laws exactly who holds the real power. I am a corporate crisis manager in Atlanta. I spend my days dismantling hostile takeovers, handling public relations disasters, and negotiating multi-million-dollar settlements. I am trained to stay absolutely calm when everything around me is burning to the ground. But nothing in my career could have prepared me for the emotional ambush waiting for me at the Calloway family estate in Buckhead. It was Thanksgiving Day. The sprawling brick mansion was suffocatingly warm, thick with the scents of roasted turkey, collard greens, and candied yams. It had been exactly 2 years since my husband Damon passed away in a car accident. This was the first major holiday I had agreed to spend with his family since his funeral. I only came because I wanted to keep his memory alive for our young son. But sitting at that massive mahogany table, I quickly realized I had walked into a highly coordinated trap. The Calloway family was basically royalty in our community. They owned Calloway Heritage, an upscale soul food restaurant chain that had been an Atlanta staple for decades. My mother-in-law, Ophelia Calloway, built her entire identity on being the powerful matriarch of that business and a respected pillar of her megachurch. To the outside world, she was devout, generous, loving. Behind closed doors, she was a master manipulator who ruled her family through financial control and emotional intimidation. From the day Damon brought me home, Ophelia made it clear I was an outsider. I did not come from their social circles. I wore tailored suits instead of extravagant church hats, and I prioritized my independent career over joining the family business. Damon was her golden child, and she resented that he chose a woman who refused to bow to her. When he died, the invisible thread tying me to her grace snapped entirely. The dinner had been tense from the start. Ophelia sat at the head of the table in a burgundy silk dress, her signature pearls gleaming under the chandelier. She spent the first hour boasting about her church donations and the supposed record profits of the restaurants. I knew the actual numbers were a disaster, but I kept my mouth shut and focused on my plate. We had just finished the main course when the atmosphere shifted. Ophelia picked up her silver fork and tapped it sharply against her crystal glass. The ringing cut through the room like a siren. Everyone froze. She stood, smoothing her dress, her eyes locking onto mine, a chilling combination of triumph and disdain. "Family," she began, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of a preacher. "Thanksgiving is a time for gratitude, but it is also a time to protect the sanctity of our traditions." She let the silence stretch. My instincts as a crisis manager warned me a targeted attack was underway. "Since my beloved son Damon went to be with the Lord, the dynamic at this table has shifted," she continued, her tone turning sorrowful and dramatic. "We tried to embrace his widow. We extended grace, but Simone has grown cold. She does not join our church fundraisers. She avoids our Sunday dinners. And frankly, her disrespect for how this family operates is casting a toxic cloud over our gatherings." I sat perfectly still, my face a blank mask. I refused to give her the satisfaction of a flinch. I had skipped her Sunday dinners because they devolved into interrogations about my finances and critiques of my parenting. I skipped her fundraisers because she used them as photo opportunities to show off her wealth. It is clear to me, and to many of you who have spoken to me in private, that Simone no longer wishes to honor the Calloway name, she proclaimed, raising her chin. "She operates as if she is above us. We cannot allow this to poison our legacy. Therefore, for the well-being of this family, I am calling for a formal family vote. I propose that Simone be permanently excluded from all future Calloway events, holidays, and family matters." The words hung in the air. It was a public execution of my place in the family. I did not gasp. I did not defend myself. I looked around the table, waiting to see who would be brave enough to speak up. Instead of objections, I watched a display of pure loyalty to the Calloway wealth. One by one, hands began to rise. Ophelia raised hers first, high and proud. Then my sister-in-law Camille, her lips curling into a smirk, a woman whose luxury SUV I had personally saved from her possession just 6 months earlier. Then the aunts and cousins, the same relatives I had hosted in my own home, the same people who had hugged me 2 hours before. 12 hands raised high above the table. 12 people voting to erase me. The room was dead silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. They were all staring, waiting for me to break down, waiting for the angry reaction that would justify their cruelty. But I simply sat there absorbing the betrayal, my mind already calculating my next move. Then the silence broke. Preston lowered his hand and leaned forward on the lace tablecloth. Preston was Camille's husband, a man who had drifted into the Calloway orbit 5 years ago and never left, a master of using progressive therapy language to mask absolute entitlement and profound laziness. He wore a trendy linen shirt and a carefully trimmed beard, and a look of deep performative empathy that made my stomach turn. "Simone, you have to understand where we are coming from," he began, soft and patronizing. "We are all on a healing journey here. Losing Damon was traumatizing for this family. But your energy lately has just been so toxic. You isolated yourself. You threw yourself into your career. Your toxic independence is a trigger for us. We just need to protect our peace. This is about generational wealth building." The phrase almost made me laugh. Preston had not held a steady job in 3 years. He lived rent-free in a townhouse Ophelia owned, pitching failed startup ideas. The audacity of this man lecturing me about wealth while eating a turkey I had silently paid for was staggering. Camille jumped in, her gold bangles clanking. "Exactly. You act like you are better than us because you run your little consulting firm downtown. You are a widow, Simone. You should be leaning on us. Instead, you walk around like you run the world. You forget you are only sitting at this table because my brother fell in love with you. Without Damon, you are just a guest who overstayed her welcome." I stared at this woman who lived entirely for social media validation, whose credit cards regularly declined at grocery stores. I knew, because I was the one who had quietly written the check that stopped her SUV from being repossessed, keeping her financial ruins secret from the very aunts and uncles around this table. Yet here she was, lecturing me about my arrogance. I looked past them at the extended relatives. People who had gladly taken my help, my gifts, my hospitality, now sat with their eyes on their plates, too cowardly to speak. They had traded their loyalty for Ophelia's approval, completely unaware her empire was a hollow shell. I was prepared to sit through the whole thing in silence, gather my things, and walk out. I had handled hostile boardrooms and ruthless corporate raiders. A table of delusional narcissists was nothing. But then a small, trembling hand tugged at my sleeve. I looked down at my son. Elias was 8 years old, a brilliant, sensitive boy who looked so much like his father it made my heart ache. His fork lay abandoned. His big brown eyes were wide with confusion and hurt, his lower lip quivering, tears spilling down his cheeks. He did not understand the web of control and jealousy that ruled his grandmother, but he understood exactly what it meant when a whole room raised their hands against his mother. "Mom," he sobbed, his voice cracking. "Why are they doing this? Why does Grandma hate us?" My heart shattered. The cold armor of my profession melted, replaced by the fierce instinct of a mother. I pulled him against my side. The sound of a grieving child should have invoked some basic human compassion. Instead, Ophelia's mask vanished. Her eyes narrowed. She slammed her hand flat against the table. The crystal rattled. "Elias, stop that whining this instant," she snapped, her voice devoid of any warmth. "I will not tolerate a crying child ruining my Thanksgiving." He flinched, burying his face in my blazer. She pointed a long finger at him. "Look how weak he is. This is grown folks' business. You act just as spoiled and disrespectful as your mother. Damon would be ashamed to see how soft you are raising this boy, Simone." The air froze. Mentioning my dead husband was a dangerous line. Using his name to abuse his only child was a declaration of war. Something shifted inside me. The patient part of my brain shut down. Every ounce of grace I had extended out of respect for the man I loved evaporated. They thought my silence was weakness. They were catastrophically wrong. I stopped comforting Elias for a second and slowly lifted my head to look directly at Ophelia. My expression must have been terrifying because Preston shifted backward and Camille's smug smile vanished. I did not raise my voice. True power is quiet, and the fury I felt was absolute zero. I pushed my chair back. The heavy legs scraped against the Persian rug. I stood, my posture straight, towering over the family that had just voted for my exile. I took Elias by his trembling hand and pulled him against my side. "Protecting your safe space," I said, barely above a whisper, yet it echoed through the room with terrifying clarity. "Is that what you call this, Ophelia? You invoke my dead husband's name to justify bullying his 8-year-old son. You speak of generational wealth while acting like a fragile, insecure tyrant. Just like you protected your safe space last year by banning me from your ribbon cutting, purely because you were terrified I would outshine Camille. You are not protecting this family. You are protecting your ego." I turned to Preston, who stared at his half-eaten turkey. "And you keep the word toxic out of your mouth. The only thing toxic in this room is the entitlement of a man who has not paid a single bill with his own money in half a decade." I guided Elias toward the foyer where our coats hung. The silence was absolute, broken only by the clicking of my heels. I knelt to zip his jacket and wiped his tears with my thumb, showing him I was not afraid. "We are leaving," I told him, making sure my voice carried back into the dining room. "And from this moment on, these people are no longer your family. You will never sit at a table where you are not respected." As I reached the door, Camille found her false courage. "Good riddance," she sneered. "Do not come crying to us when you realize how hard it is out there alone." I glanced back over my shoulder at the 12 people who had eagerly participated in my execution. A pathetic portrait of fake nobility. Sitting in a dining room funded by a failing restaurant chain they were too arrogant to know was bleeding dry. I smiled, cold and calculated. "Enjoy your turkey, Ophelia. I hope it tastes exactly like victory, because it is the last meal you will ever enjoy in peace." I pulled the oak door open and stepped out, shutting it behind me with a thud that severed my ties to the Calloway family forever. The cold Atlanta air hit my face. It felt like walking out of a tomb into pure oxygen. I walked Elias to my car, buckled him in, and kissed his forehead. "Are we really never going back, Mom?" he asked. "Never. I will never let anyone speak to you like that again. You and I are a team. We do not need their permission to be happy, and we certainly do not need their table to eat." I drove down the long driveway and past the iron gates and looked at the mansion in my rearview mirror one last time. They thought they had won. They believed that by voting me out they had stripped me of my power. They had no idea they had just handed me the exact justification I needed to ruin them. The grief that had anchored me to this family for 2 years had burned away, replaced by the razor-sharp mind of a crisis manager. They wanted to protect their generational wealth. They wanted to dominate the one person who actually held the keys to their entire kingdom. I pulled into the garage of our building, Elias asleep in the back, and opened my encrypted messaging app. I scrolled to my lead attorney, a cutthroat woman named Yvonne who handled my most sensitive acquisitions. No hesitation, no mercy. I typed one directive. * initiate the Ember Protocol. It is time to collect. *. I carried a sleeping Elias up to our penthouse. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Atlanta skyline sprawled out, a grid of power and money that ran on logic, contracts, and leverage. I laid him in bed and stood in the doorway watching him breathe. He was safe here. They would never touch him again. The next morning, my phone was choked with notifications, dozens of missed calls from relatives, frantic texts from church acquaintances, and urgent links from my firm's media team. I tapped the first link, a live broadcast. There was Camille, broadcasting to her 50,000 followers from the Calloway sunroom in an oversized sweater, hair in a messy bun, no makeup, a curated look designed to project raw vulnerability. She dabbed at her eyes and stared tragically into the lens. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," she whimpered. "But my family is bleeding today. Yesterday, on a day meant for giving thanks, my sister-in-law Simone shattered our hearts. We tried to give her a safe space to heal after my brother Damon passed. But she stood up at our table, completely unprovoked, screamed at my mother, and walked out. She took my nephew away from us. She is a greedy, cold woman who only cared about the Calloway name when Damon was alive to pay for her lifestyle. Please pray for my mother. She is devastated. The comments were predictable. Strangers who knew nothing about my life called me a monster, a gold digger, a wicked widow. Camille soaked up the validation, replying with prayer hand emojis. Before the video finished, my phone rang. Yvonne, tell me you are watching this train wreck. I am. She is putting on quite a show. The no makeup really sells the victim narrative. It gets worse, she said, keys clicking. Ophelia did not just let Camille talk. She submitted an expedited filing to the state registry this morning. She officially removed your name from the Damon Calloway Memorial Scholarship Fund. That landed like a physical blow. The scholarship fund was a project Damon and I had dreamed up before he died, to help underprivileged youth in Atlanta reach college. I had personally seeded it with $200,000. Erasing my name was a deliberate attempt to erase my history with the man I loved and claim my money as her own charity. She appointed Preston as the new co-director. Yvonne added, a man who cannot balance his own checking account, now managing a charity endowment. The anger surged, hot and violent. My instinct was to draft a scathing press release, post the receipts proving I had saved Camille's car, expose Preston's gambling debts to Ophelia's entire church. I wanted to burn their image to ash by the end of the day, but I am a crisis manager. I know the fatal mistake rookies make under attack. Reacting out of emotion is how you lose your leverage. Do we issue a cease and desist? Yvonne asked. I can have a gag order served to Camille by noon, an injunction on the scholarship fund by end of day. No, we do absolutely nothing. She paused. Nothing. They are dragging your name through the mud in front of the whole city. Camille's video already has 20,000 views. Let them eat, I said, watching the morning traffic below. When an opponent is digging their own grave, the worst thing you can do is take the shovel out of their hands. I ordered a complete communication blackout. No press releases, no legal threats, no texts. I even deleted my social apps to remove the temptation. They want a reaction, Yvonne. They want me to look angry, erratic, defensive. If I fight now, it becomes a messy family feud, a case of he said, she said. But if I stay silent, their lies become an uncontested public record. Camille's video is documented defamation. Ophelia's filing is documented financial manipulation. They are building my lawsuit for me, brick by brick, and their arrogance stops them from seeing it. Silence terrifies narcissists. They assume they broke you. They get sloppy. They overplay their hand. Understood. Radio silence. But what about the Ember Protocol, the financial audit on the restaurants? Accelerate it. I want every ledger, every lease, every vendor contract scoured by the end of the week. I want to know exactly how much they owe, who they owe it to, and where every penny has gone. I finished my coffee. They think this is a social media war. They have no idea I am about to repo their entire reality. The week went exactly as I calculated. My silence drove Ophelia out of her mind. Women like her feed on conflict. By refusing to step onto her stage, I was starving her. By Thursday, her patience snapped. My phone lit up, Ophelia Calloway. I let it ring 3 times, centered myself, and answered without a word. Simone, she barked, clipped with artificial authority. I am calling you in my capacity as Chief Executive Officer of Calloway Heritage. I smiled. Good afternoon. What can I do for the Chief Executive Officer today? Since you turned your back on this family, the board has been reviewing our assets. It has come to our attention that you still possess the Range Rover. That vehicle is registered under the restaurant group for tax purposes. You are no longer entitled to it. Return it to the estate immediately. Leave the keys in the mailbox. The Range Rover was indeed registered to Calloway Heritage. 2 years ago, during a brutal tax audit, Damon had begged me to register my new car under the company name to offset their liabilities with a depreciation deduction. But the down payment, the installments, and every custom upgrade came from my personal account. Ophelia knew that. She was legally stealing a car I had paid for, using a tax loophole as her weapon. She expected me to fight, to drag it out, in a messy battle that would give her months of drama. "I am so sorry for the oversight, Ophelia," I replied, smooth and pleasant. "You are absolutely right. The vehicle belongs to the company. I will have it returned to your driveway tonight." The line went quiet. She had braced for a screaming match, and I handed her a surrender. "Well," she stammered. "Yes, see that you do. Make sure it is washed." She hung up. I let out a sharp laugh, then called Terrence, who owned a high-end custom auto shop in South Atlanta and owed me a massive favor after I saved his business from a zoning dispute. "Terrence, I need an extraction team at my penthouse garage tonight at midnight. Flatbed tow truck, heavy-duty power tools, and 4 concrete cinder blocks." At midnight, Terrence and 2 mechanics rolled in. I handed them the keys. The Range Rover was a masterpiece, but the true value was in the aftermarket work: $25,000 of custom-forged wheels, high-performance tires, and a bespoke sound system, all paid out of my own pocket. They worked with Formula One precision. They stripped all 4 tires and rims, removed the imported floor mats, and uninstalled the sound system, leaving the factory wires hanging from the dashboard. Everything I had financed was gone, leaving the bare, undrivable bones of the vehicle that technically belonged to Calloway Heritage. By 2 in the morning, it was winched onto the flatbed. We drove to Buckhead. I still had the master gate code. The iron doors swung open. Terrence backed the diesel truck up the driveway and stopped in front of Ophelia's grand doors, beside her rose bushes and her beloved fountain. With a hydraulic hiss, the flatbed tilted, and the Range Rover slid down onto the 4 cinder blocks. The undercarriage groaned as it settled. It looked like a scrapyard wreck, abandoned in the middle of a multi-million-dollar estate. I walked to the windshield and slipped a piece of cream cardstock under the wiper. In sweeping calligraphy, it read, "Asterisk company car returned. Tires were paid for by me. Asterisk, we drove away into the night, leaving the gates wide open." I was sipping espresso when the sun rose. At exactly 7, my phone lit up. Preston. Then Camille. Then 3 back-to-back calls from Ophelia. I answered none of them. I imagined the chaos: Ophelia stepping out for the morning paper and seeing a $100,000 SUV on cinder blocks in her driveway for all her judgmental neighbors to see. Preston realizing the car he intended to claim was undrivable, stripped of everything valuable. They wanted to play corporate games, to use technicalities to strip me and humiliate me. But they were amateurs against a professional. I had followed Ophelia's instructions to the exact letter of the law. I returned the company property. I just kept what was mine. A furious text arrived, a long paragraph demanding I pay for new tires, threatening the police, calling me an unhinged lunatic. I smiled and swiped it away. Let them call the police. I had every receipt proving ownership of the parts. The authorities would call it a civil matter and leave them standing in the driveway looking like fools. This was only the appetizer. They thought they were dealing with a heartbroken widow throwing a tantrum. They had no idea that, while they screamed at a car on cinder blocks, my legal team was preparing to detonate the foundation of their entire existence. At 10 the next morning, I walked into the glass conference room of Klein & Rhodes, the most ruthless corporate law firm in Atlanta. Yvonne waited at the head of the table in a tailored emerald suit, her natural hair in an immaculate crown. A legal predator who did not lose cases. She slid a thick leather portfolio toward me. I saw the photos of the Range Rover. A bold move. But we have bigger fish today. Are you ready to look at the real numbers? Inside lay the commercial leases for Calloway Heritage. The family prided themselves on their 3 prime restaurant locations, the crown jewels of Ophelia's empire. What the public did not know, and what Ophelia had conveniently ignored, was who actually owned the ground those restaurants stood on. 3 years ago, before Damon died, the business was quietly drowning. Ophelia had mismanaged funds, overspent on church donations for social clout, and ignored real estate trends. Their landlord was preparing to evict them from all 3 locations. Damon came to me devastated, begging me to save his mother's legacy. I had the capital, but I knew her pride would never let her accept a bailout from the daughter-in-law she despised. So I created a blind corporate entity, Meridian Holdings. Meridian bought all 3 lots in cash and became their new landlord. Ophelia spent years bragging about the brilliant deal she had struck with a massive real estate conglomerate. She never knew the conglomerate was just me, at my laptop, keeping her business alive. Yvonne tapped the top document. They signed the renewal yesterday. Preston facilitated it in his self-appointed capacity as chief financial officer. He did not have external counsel review the terms. Not a single lawyer. Not one. He assumed it was a standard extension. He blindly signed a 10-year lease with a 30% rent hike. More importantly, he signed off on the accelerated default clause. She pulled up a report. Under the original agreement, Calloway Heritage was required to complete $500,000 in infrastructure and safety upgrades by the end of this fiscal year. They have not done a single one. They have not even pulled the city permits. Under the clause Preston just authorized, Meridian has the right to demand that entire $500,000 immediately. If they cannot pay within 7 days, we can terminate the lease, seize all physical assets to cover the debt, and lock the doors permanently. I leaned back, letting the magnitude of their stupidity wash over me. Preston had handed me the keys to their kingdom because he wanted to play executive without doing the work. Ophelia authorized it because she trusted a man with business buzzwords over the financial reality of her failing enterprise. They had voted me out of the family, completely unaware I owned the foundation their family stood on. They are already bleeding cash, I said, scanning the summaries. There is no way they have $500,000 in liquid assets. They are completely underwater. The moment we issue the demand letter, the clock starts. They will panic, try for emergency loans, but their credit is leveraged to the limit. When that fails, they default. Draft the demand letter. Send it by secure courier directly to the flagship restaurant. Let them see exactly what happens when they disturb my peace. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon. For the first time since Damon passed, the suffocating weight of grief had lifted, replaced by sharp purpose. Before I reached my car, my phone buzzed messages from Preston. Less than 48 hours after weaponizing therapy buzzwords to excommunicate me, he was texting me like a friendly colleague. The first was a photo of a business card. * Preston Bradley, Chief Financial Officer, Calloway Heritage Restaurant Group. * the second was a block of condescending progressivism. Simone, I hope you are finding your peace. Exciting news, the board appointed me Chief Financial Officer. I am ready to guide this family into a new era of prosperity. A third message carried a PDF. We need to clean up some administrative loose ends. Attached is a relinquishment form for the 3% equity share Damon left you in the operational holding company. A minor detail, but it helps me streamline our tax structure. Please sign and return by Monday. He was asking me to voluntarily forfeit the last legal thread tying me to my late husband's business. He assumed I was too exhausted to fight for a measly 3%. He believed his brand new self-appointed title gave him leverage. He had no idea that as his anonymous landlord, I already owned the entire chessboard. I did not type a paragraph. I kept it surgically precise. I knew exactly what sat inside the heavy steel floor safe in the back office of the flagship. The daily deposits, the emergency funds, the sensitive documents. And thanks to the preliminary audit, I knew Preston had been dipping into that exact safe for months, skimming cash to cover gambling debts and buy designer gifts for a mistress, masking it with sloppy ledgers. I also knew the disastrous 10-year lease he had just blindly signed was sitting right on top of those fabricated ledgers inside that same safe. I tapped out my reply. Congratulations on the new title, Preston. Check the safe. Send. The read receipt appeared immediately. The typing bubble bounced for 3 seconds, vanished, appeared again, vanished. He was panicking. Check the safe *, a cryptic directive carrying 1,000 threats. Did I know about the missing cash? The lease? The ambiguity was the weapon. No response came. The silence spoke volumes. The weekend passed exactly as I predicted. By Sunday, the Calloway estate was buzzing with a lavish celebratory brunch to honor Preston's new title: shrimp and grits, buttered biscuits, bottomless mimosas. The dining room, the same room where they had voted to banish me, was packed with the same aunts, uncles, and church friends who had watched my execution in silence. I made sure my courier arrived at the peak of the celebration. A licensed process server in a sharp gray suit knocked at the door and explicitly asked for Preston Bradley, Chief Financial Officer. I can imagine his pride at being summoned, thrilled his title was already recognized. He signed with a flourish and strolled back inside. Ophelia, hungry for the spotlight, asked what had been delivered, assuming a congratulatory gift. Preston tore open the seal and pulled out the watermarked documents bearing the logo of Meridian Holdings. The smile slid off his face so fast it looked like a physical injury. The color drained from his cheeks. His hands began to shake the paper. Camille stepped forward, laughing nervously, asking what was wrong. He could not speak. Ophelia lost patience, marched over, snatched the documents, and adjusted her reading glasses. A formal notice of accelerated default and demand for payment. Calloway Heritage was in severe violation of its lease. The mandatory upgrades required by the contract Preston had blindly signed had been ignored. The cost was $500,000, demanded into escrow within 7 calendar days. If the funds did not arrive, Meridian would terminate the lease for all 3 locations, seize all physical assets, kitchen equipment, furniture, inventory, and change the locks at midnight on the 7th day. Ophelia dropped the papers as if they had caught fire. The room descended into chaos. $500,000, an impossible number for a chain barely making payroll. Preston scrambled to explain, claiming a predatory trap, but Ophelia knew Meridian was a faceless conglomerate that did not negotiate. Camille began to cry, her makeup running, as she realized her luxury lifestyle was about to evaporate. Ophelia turned her wrath on Preston, demanding to know how he could sign such a document without a lawyer. He deflected, throwing therapy buzzwords, asking her to regulate her emotions and process this hurdle as a team. But no buzzword fixes $500,000 in immediate debt. They had 1 week to find money that did not exist. Their credit was maxed. No bank in Georgia would approve a high-risk commercial loan of that size in 7 days. They were trapped in a burning building, and they had locked the doors themselves. Across the city, I checked the tracking, delivered and signed for by Preston Bradley at 11:14. I took a slow, satisfying bite of breakfast. The countdown had begun. But I was not done. As the screaming reached a fever pitch, a sharp chime cut through, the alert tone Ophelia reserved for secure banking notifications. She snatched up her tablet expecting another overdraft. Instead, an anonymous, encrypted email. Subject line, * Calloway Heritage Restaurant Group, forensic audit, executive summary enclosed, *. She tapped the attachment, a pristine 20-page PDF. No greeting, no signature, just undeniable data. As she read the bolded summary, the remaining color drained from her face. The audit bypassed the lease entirely and focused on internal cash flow over 18 months. Someone had been systematically siphoning money from the operating accounts. The total, exactly $150,000. The thief had not been clever. Fake vendor invoices for repairs that never happened. Inflated inventory orders. Cash skimmed from the steel floor safe, the same safe I had told Preston to check, and the audit detailed exactly where every dollar had gone. Ophelia began reading the expenditures aloud, her voice dropping into a lethal register that paralyzed the room. Routing numbers linking the restaurant's accounts to offshore betting networks. Thousands lost on poker and sports books. Preston stepped back, ash gray, and bumped the table, shattering a glass. She did not stop. Receipts for weekend stays at boutique hotels, lease payments for a high-rise condominium disconnected from the estate, and then receipts from high-end jewelers, diamond bracelets, red-soled heels, custom handbags. Camille froze, looking at her own bare wrists, her own shoes. None of it had ever reached her closet. The realization hit her like a freight train. The money was not just funding Preston's gambling. It was funding a separate, expensive life for a mistress. Camille let out a piercing shriek and lunged across the room, hands like claws, launching herself at her husband. The brunch turned into a physical altercation, relatives rushing to pull a thrashing Camille off the man she had just defended to the entire world. Preston scrambled backward, pleading, shrieking that the email was a cyber attack, a framing job, that I must have fabricated the entire document. But Ophelia was no fool with a bank statement. She saw the timestamps, the routing numbers, the withdrawal dates, all matching the exact days Preston had volunteered to handle deposits. She realized, with crushing humiliation, that she had handed the keys of her empire to a parasitic fraud draining her dry under her nose. The wealthy church friends made hurried excuses, grabbed their coats, and practically ran for the door, eager to escape the blast zone of the Calloway family's degradation. In under 20 minutes, Ophelia had lost her business, her dignity, and her audience. My phone lit up. Yvonne. The payload was delivered and opened, confirmed access from their primary IP address. Excellent. Delivering the lease demand, and the audit within 10 minutes of each other was genius, Simone. That is the essence of crisis management, I said. If I only sent the lease demand, they would have a common enemy in Meridian. They would unite their panic and form a trauma bond. But by dropping the audit on top of the eviction, I eliminated their ability to unite. I destroyed their trust in each other. Ophelia cannot focus on saving her restaurants because she is realizing her son-in-law has been stealing from her. Camille cannot focus on her standing because she is drowning in the humiliation of a broke, cheating husband. I did not just burn their house down. I threw a grenade into the living room and locked the doors from the outside. Divide and conquer. The clock is ticking on the 500,000. Next move. We wait. We watch them drown. Ophelia is proud and desperate. Once the shock fades, she will realize she has no one left to turn to, that the only person with the capital, the connections, and the power to save her is the exact woman she just voted out of her family. The call did not come Monday. It took 48 hours for reality to shatter Ophelia's ego. By Tuesday, the walls of her estate must have felt like a shrinking cell. She had exhausted every avenue, every wealthy contact in her congregation, every bank manager she had wooed at a gala, every shady lender who would return a voicemail. None would hand $500,000 to a chain publicly bleeding cash and internally run by an embezzling fraud. I was in my sunroom, a private manicurist named Lucia applying a base coat, when my phone vibrated. The contact photo showed Ophelia at a pulpit in a huge feathered hat, looking down at her congregation with moral superiority. I put it on speaker and leaned back, entirely relaxed. Simone, sweetheart. The voice was a masterclass in manipulation, soft, dripping with sickeningly sweet maternal warmth. No trace of the woman who had slammed the table days before. I have been praying for you so hard. We have all been worried about you and little Elias. The house feels so empty. I know tensions ran high during the holiday, but you know how passionate this family is. We are all grieving Damon. At the end of the day, family is family. The audacity of framing a coordinated 12-person tribunal as a case of high emotions was breathtaking. I appreciate the prayers, Ophelia. To what do I owe the pleasure of this call? She hesitated, swallowing her pride. The truth is, the business has encountered a minor administrative hurdle. We are dealing with an aggressive commercial landlord, a faceless conglomerate called Meridian Holdings. They acquired the land under our restaurants and are using predatory tactics. They sent a fabricated demand for $500,000 over some outdated infrastructure clauses. It is pure extortion. A minor hurdle. She was facing the seizure of her entire empire in 5 days. That sounds stressful, I replied, devoid of empathy. But I am not sure why you are bringing this to me. Did you not just appoint Preston as chief financial officer? Surely a man of his progressive business acumen can navigate a basic lease dispute. Silence. I knew exactly why she could not rely on Preston, but she was far too proud to admit her golden family was a shipwreck. Preston is overwhelmed with restructuring, she lied. This is where we need your expertise, Simone. You deal with corporate bullies all the time. Find out who sits on the board of this Meridian, get them on the phone, negotiate this down, or better yet, make it disappear. She was not asking. Even in her darkest hour, she viewed my skills as a free resource she was entitled to command. And why exactly would I do that, Ophelia? Because family helps family, she snapped, her true anger flashing through. Damon dedicated his life to building the Calloway Heritage name. This is his legacy. You are his widow. You have a moral obligation to protect the empire your husband loved. Weaponizing my dead husband again, using my grief as a leash. Let me make sure I understand the sequence of events. Just last week, you held a democratic vote to permanently ban me from the family. You said my toxic independence was ruining your safe space. Camille went online to call me a wicked woman. You filed paperwork to erase my name from a scholarship fund I personally financed. And now, Less than a week later, you are demanding I leverage my network to save your business from bankruptcy under the guise of family loyalty. Am I assessing this accurately? You are focusing on the past, she pleaded, panic bleeding through. I am talking about our future, the generational wealth Elias is supposed to inherit. Do not do this for me. Do it for your son. If Calloway Heritage falls, Elias loses his birthright. She thought she was speaking to the woman who used to bite her tongue and clean up their messes. She thought my resources were a shield she could hide behind. I looked at the timer counting down the 7-day eviction I had legally served her. The trap was perfectly set. She had walked into the center of it, blinded by arrogance, begging the executioner to stop the blade, unaware whose hand rested on the lever. Simone, did you hear me? I need you to call Meridian today. We do not have time for your grudges. I heard you, but let us be clear on the parameters. You want me to use my crisis firm, pro bono, to rescue a company your son-in-law bankrupted. It is your family duty. My family duty, I repeated. Fascinating, because 1 week ago you held a vote to revoke my family status. You made your bed, Ophelia. You chose Preston to lead your finances because he looks the part and feeds your ego. You let him sign a 10-year lease without a lawyer. You handed him the safe, and he rewarded your trust by stealing $150,000 for casino chips and a mistress. A sharp intake of breath. How do you know about that? Because I am a professional. I know everything. I know your credit is maxed out. I know your vendors are preparing to freeze your accounts. I know you do not have $500,000. Then you know we are going to lose everything, she cried, abandoning the matriarch act. Simone, please, if you know all this, then you know you have to make that call. Just ask them for an extension. Ask them for a favor. I cannot do that, Ophelia, I said, dropping to a lethal whisper. Why not? She shrieked, panic boiling into rage. Are you that vindictive? You are a useless, selfish girl. I always knew you were a mistake. I let her scream. I let her exhaust the last fumes of her superiority. When she gasped for air, I delivered the fatal strike. I am not letting a faceless landlord destroy his legacy, Ophelia. I am doing it myself. I cannot call the board of Meridian Holdings to ask for an extension. I cannot ask them for a favor, because I cannot ask myself for a favor. The dead silence that fell over the speaker was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The silence right after a bomb goes off, before the debris hits the ground. What are you talking about? She choked out hollow. 3 years ago, your empire was already failing. You were 6 months behind on rent. Your landlord was drawing up eviction papers. Damon came to me in tears, begging me to save the business his father started. He knew your pride would never let you accept a bailout from the daughter-in-law you hated. So I took my own money from my own firm and created a blind entity. I named it Meridian Holdings. I bought the lots out from under your landlord. I paid in cash. I saved your business, Ophelia. I am Meridian Holdings. I own the dirt beneath your flagship. I own the walls of your kitchens. I own the parking lot where you parked that stripped-down Range Rover. No, she gasped. That is a lie. You do not have that kind of money. I have exactly that kind of money. And I have your signature on a binding lease that spells out the consequences of defaulting on your upgrades your golden boy ignored. You voted me out of the family. You wanted to protect your safe space. Well, your safe space is sitting on my property, and your rent is due. You have 5 days to deposit $500,000 into my escrow account. When you fail, I will terminate your lease and seize every stove, every table, and every piece of silverware inside those buildings. Simone, please, she wailed, entirely broken, dissolving into ugly sobs. You cannot do this. We will be ruined. You should have thought about that before you raised your hand at the Thanksgiving table. I pressed the red button, cutting off her weeping. Checkmate. All that was left was sweeping up the pieces. They exhausted the phones. They failed at the banks. There was one option left: to leave the safety of their mansion and come into my territory, to face the executioner in person. It was precisely 10 on Thursday when my assistant buzzed, alarmed. 3 people were causing a scene in reception, threatening to call the police if security did not let them through. I calmly told her to send them back. The glass doors swung open. Ophelia, Camille, and Preston stormed in. The contrast between my pristine office and their deterioration was jarring. Ophelia looked a decade older, her dress wrinkled, her hair unkempt. Camille looked hollowed out. But Preston took the lead, marching to my desk, his face a furious blotchy red. His whole life he had relied on his status to intimidate his way out of consequences. He believed that if he raised his voice loud enough and threw enough jargon, the black woman across from him would shrink and submit. He slammed both hands flat against my desk. I did not blink. You think you are so smart, Simone. You think you can orchestrate a hostile takeover of a family business and get away with it. We spoke to actual lawyers. What you did was textbook entrapment. It is corporate fraud. You set up a shell company to trick us into a predatory lease. You are going to reverse that eviction, tear up that demand letter, and transfer the deeds into a trust managed by me. If you do not, I am going to the district attorney. I will see you indicted. I will ruin your firm. I will make sure you lose your license, your business, and your freedom. I sat perfectly still. I let him scream, let him empty his lungs and exhaust his borrowed legal terms. I did not interrupt. I simply radiated glacial calm. He was sweating, frantic, losing control, while I breathed evenly in a silk suit, looking at him like a minor accounting error I was about to delete. When he ran out of breath, he stood panting, waiting for me to apologize. Instead, I picked up a silver pen and rolled it between my fingers. Are you quite finished, Preston? Do not use that condescending tone with me, he snapped, though he recoiled at my lack of fear. I am giving you one chance to fix this before I destroy your life. I set the pen down and locked eyes with Ophelia, trembling by the door. She knew. She could see it in my posture. Preston's screaming had accomplished nothing, and they had walked straight into the slaughterhouse. I opened my lower drawer with agonizing slowness and pulled out a thick black folder. I slid it across the desk. It stopped exactly 1 inch from Preston's trembling hands. You want to talk about fraud, Preston? Let us discuss corporate fraud. I highly recommend you open that file before you say another word. He flipped it open. I watched the exact second his soul left his body, his eyes tracking the forensic audit header, the highlighted routing codes, the photographic evidence of his forged invoices. The red vanished from his face. He turned sickly gray. What is it? Camille demanded, snatching the folder when he tried to shut it. Take a good look at your husband's generational wealth building, Camille. She scanned the transfers, the cash withdrawals, and then the third page, receipts for a condominium lease and diamond purchases. She looked at her own bare wrists. The realization hit her like a collapsing building. Who is Brielle? She whispered, reading a name on a wire transfer for a tropical vacation. Preston, who is Brielle? He backed away, hands up. Camille, this is a setup. Simone fabricated these. She hacked the accounts. I did not fabricate your signature on the lease for a midtown apartment, I said smoothly. I did not fabricate the bank security footage of you depositing cash into a secondary account. The forensic firm I hired is federally recognized. You stole $150,000 from your mother-in-law to fund a gambling addiction and a mistress. Camille let out an agonizing scream and threw the folder at his chest. The pages exploded across the floor. She lunged, hitting him with her fists. He caught her wrists, eyes wild. Simone, stop this. We can fix it quietly. I will pay it back. Just keep it inside the family. You cannot release this. It will destroy everything. Pay it back with what, Preston? You have no job, no assets. The chain you claim to manage is insolvent because you drained its capital. You have nothing to offer me. I will sign whatever you want. I will sign the restaurants over. Just let me walk away. Keep the audit between us. I am begging you. I clasped my hands. You are misunderstanding the timeline, Preston. You are standing in my office trying to negotiate a settlement that expired before you woke up this morning. He froze. Camille stopped. By the door, Ophelia gripped the frame, horror in her eyes. What do you mean? I did not print that folder to scare you. I do not bluff. At exactly 8 o'clock this morning, couriers from my legal department hand-delivered fully certified, unredacted copies of that audit to 2 locations. The silence was absolute. The first went to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. You did not just steal from your mother-in-law. You committed wire fraud and failed to declare $150,000 of illicit income. The IRS does not care about your safe spaces or your healing journeys. They care about tax evasion, and they pursue it with extreme prejudice. His knees buckled. He grabbed a chair. The second package went to the white-collar crime unit of the Atlanta Police Department. They have the routing numbers, the forged invoices, the security footage. You are not just fired, Preston. You are legally finished. By the end of the week, your assets will be frozen, your passport flagged. You are going to federal prison. Camille collapsed onto the floor, wailing. Her husband was not just a cheater. He was a felon waiting to be arrested, and her life of luxury was over. Preston stood paralyzed, the man who had threatened to have me indicted 10 minutes ago now staring at his own cell. "Simone, please," he gasped, tears spilling. "I will not survive in prison, call them off. Tell them it was an accounting error. I am begging you, have mercy." I thought of how he had voted to erase me, how he had weaponized my dead husband's memory. "I am a crisis manager, Preston. My job is to fix problems. You were the problem, and I just fixed you." He collapsed into a chair, head between his knees, hyperventilating. That left Ophelia. She released the doorframe and stepped into the center of my office. Her signature dress hung on her shaking frame like a discarded costume. She had come to command a room and found herself in a corporate graveyard. The arrogance that defined her was gone, replaced by raw terror. Then her legs buckled. The woman who demanded everyone bow to her collapsed to her knees on my carpet. She crawled forward until she reached my desk and gripped its edge like a life raft. "Simone, I am begging you on my knees before God. Do whatever you want with Preston. Let him rot in prison. He deserves it for what he did to my daughter. But please have mercy on me. Have mercy on the family name. You cannot take Calloway Heritage from us. Damon built that brand. It is his legacy. If you destroy the restaurants, you destroy the last thing Damon left behind." She played her final card. "Think of little Elias. He is a Calloway. You cannot take his father's legacy. How will you look your son in the eyes and tell him you destroyed his birthright to punish me? You are a mother, Simone. I am begging you, mother to mother." The air went freezing. I looked down at the woman kneeling at my feet. The audacity of weaponizing my dead husband and my 8-year-old son to save her own skin was staggering. This was the same woman who, 1 week ago, had screamed at my crying child and called him spoiled. I stood and walked around the desk until I was directly over her. "Do not ever put my son's name in your mouth again," I commanded, my voice a lethal quiet blade. She flinched. "You want to talk about Damon and his legacy? You do not care about his legacy. You rotted it from the inside. You took the thriving business he spent his life building and turned it into a piggy bank for your vanity. You let a con artist drain the accounts so you could play the progressive matriarch. You neglected the infrastructure. You alienated the vendors. You did not protect his legacy, Ophelia. You infected it. And if I leave those restaurants in your hands one more day, there will be nothing left for Elias but debt, scandal, and a ruined name." I crouched to her eye level. "I am not destroying Damon's legacy. I am rescuing it from you." She stared, realizing my plan was far larger than simple revenge. "I am seizing all 3 locations. I am changing the locks at midnight. I am liquidating every tainted asset, paying off the honest vendors you neglected, and restructuring the entire corporate entity from the ground up. Every piece of real estate, every intellectual property right, every functioning account is being transferred immediately." "Transferred where?" she whispered. "Into an irrevocable, highly secured blind trust, managed by my legal team, and the sole beneficiary of that trust is Elias." The color drained from her face. "He will inherit a clean, profitable empire the day he turns 25. I am securing his generational wealth. I am protecting his birthright. And until then, you, Camille, and everyone who sat at that Thanksgiving table will have zero access to it. You will not see a single dime. You are permanently excised from his future." "No," she gasped, reaching for the hem of my suit. "Simone, please, I have nothing else. I mortgaged my house to keep up appearances. Where will I go?" I stepped back, pulling free, and stood to my full height over the wreckage of the Calloway hierarchy scattered across my floor, the golden child weeping on the carpet, the fraud hyperventilating in a chair, the tyrant begging for scraps. "I suggest you learn how to budget, because as the sole owner of Meridian Holdings and the trustee of Elias's estate, I am delivering your final notice. You are evicted from all commercial properties. You are fired from the company my husband built, and you are permanently cut off from my finances. I opened my door wide, gesturing to the hallway where my security team was already waiting. Your safe space is officially closed. Get out of my office. The fallout was swift, absolute, and public. Just 2 days later, red and blue lights lit the early morning fog outside the Midtown condominium Preston had leased for his mistress. I watched the live broadcast from my kitchen island. Preston was marched out in handcuffs, still wearing the wrinkled shirt from my office, looking small. There was no family money for bail. He was charged with multiple counts of wire fraud and tax evasion and left to rot in a holding cell. Camille filed for divorce the next day, a futile attempt to distance herself from the wreckage. But without my hidden interventions, her reality crashed. The SUV gone, the penthouse seized by creditors, the platinum cards canceled. A few weeks later, my assistant verified her new employment. Camille, who had sneered at my career, was working the closing shift at a Greasy Spoon diner on the edge of the city, in a stiff polyester uniform that smelled of old fryer oil, wiping down sticky tables. Her 50,000 followers had abandoned her the second the money dried up. But the most poetic justice was reserved for Ophelia. The bank moved aggressively on the mortgaged estate. I drove past once, just to see the bright yellow foreclosure sign planted in front of her beloved rose bushes. Stripped of her mansion and her empire, she moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a decaying complex. But the true punishment was not the poverty, it was the social death. She went to her megachurch the following Sunday, hoping to play the victim one last time. But news of the embezzlement and eviction had swept through the congregation like wildfire. When she walked down the center aisle, the people she had spent decades judging simply turned their backs. The pastor looked away. The pew where she had held court for 20 years sat empty. She had been excommunicated from the only world that mattered to her. While they sank into the abyss of their own making, I restructured Damon's legacy. Meridian seized all 3 locations. The tarnished Calloway Heritage signs came down, replaced with sleek, modern branding. I cleared the bad debts, paid the honest vendors, and placed every appreciating asset into an ironclad blind trust bearing a single indisputable name: Elias. 6 months after the Thanksgiving dinner that started it all, the dust had settled. The air in Atlanta felt different now, clean, breathable, entirely mine. I sat in a curved leather booth at one of the most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants in the city. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. I wore a tailored emerald dress, a diamond pendant at my collarbone, and took a slow sip of a vintage Bordeaux. Across from me sat Elias in a sharp little blazer, his eyes bright and full of unrestrained joy, laughing at a joke the waiter told while slicing into an extravagant chocolate dessert. There was no fear in his eyes anymore. No anxiety, no toxic pressure, no grandmother waiting to snap at him for simply existing. He was safe. He was loved. And his future was legally secured by an empire that could never be touched by greedy relatives. I reached across the table and wiped a smudge of chocolate from his chin and smiled at him, a real, warm, fiercely protective smile. He smiled back and took another eager bite. I leaned into the plush leather, turned my head from my son, and looked directly into the lens. The warm light caught the sharp, unwavering focus in my eyes. They voted to ban me from the family, so I bought the family and I evicted them. Respect is not requested, it is collected.